The rain fell in sheets across the highway, making the yellow lines blur under the patrol car's headlights. Officer Mike Reynolds wiped a hand across his tired eyes, the clock on his dashboard reading 11:47 p.m. 3 more hours until his shift ended. 15 years with the Oak Ridge Police Department had taught him that late-night highway patrol was a mix of boring stretches and sudden bursts of trouble. He took another sip of lukewarm coffee from his travel mug. The radio crackled with occasional updates from dispatch, but his section of Highway 16 remained quiet tonight. Most folks had enough sense to stay home in weather like this. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm as Mike scanned the road ahead. Through the curtain of rain, he spotted a silver sedan about 50 yards ahead. Nothing unusual about that except the car seemed to drift slightly over the center line before correcting itself. His eyes narrowed. The vehicle's left taillight flickered and then went dark. "Got you," he murmured to himself, setting down his coffee and flipping on his roof lights. The blue and red flashed against the wet asphalt, reflecting in puddles along the roadside. The sedan continued for another quarter-mile before slowly pulling onto the shoulder. Mike radioed in the license plate and his location to dispatch before stepping out into the downpour. His uniform jacket provided little protection against the driving rain. Water immediately began running down his neck despite pulling his hat low over his forehead. He approached the driver's side with practiced caution, his right hand resting near his hip by habit. The driver's window hummed down, revealing a woman who appeared to be in her mid-30s. Her knuckles were white against the steering wheel. "License and registration, please," Mike said, his voice taking on the professional tone he'd perfected over thousands of traffic stops. "Do you know why I pulled you over tonight?" The woman fumbled with her purse. "I'm sorry, officer, is it the taillight? I've been meaning to get it fixed." Mike noticed her hands trembling slightly as she dug through her wallet. "Yes, ma'am. Your left taillight is out, and you were weaving a bit back there. Have you had anything to drink tonight?" "No, nothing," she said quickly. "I'm just tired, coming back from visiting my sister in Millbrook. It's a 3-hour drive." She handed over her license and registration. Mike's flashlight illuminated the name, Lisa Chen. As she stretched her arm to pass him the documents, the sleeve of her jacket rode up slightly, revealing what looked like the edge of a tattoo on her wrist. Nothing unusual about that. Plenty of people had tattoos these days, but something about her general nervousness put his senses on alert. "Sit tight, Ms. Chen. I'll be right back." Mike jogged back to his patrol car, already soaked to the skin despite the short distance. He slid into the driver's seat, shaking water from his hat before placing it on the passenger seat. The heater blasted as he ran Lisa Chen's information through the system. Her record came back clean, not even a parking ticket. The car was registered, in her name, tax and insurance up to date. Everything looked perfectly in order, which somehow made Mike more suspicious rather than less. 15 years on the job had given him a sixth sense about people, and something felt off about this woman. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, watching her through his windshield. She sat perfectly still, facing forward, hands still, gripping the wheel as if she might need to make a quick getaway. Most innocent drivers would be checking their phones, looking in the mirror, or showing some signs of impatience. Mike decided to dig a little deeper. He ran her name through the national database, not expecting anything to pop. The search seemed to take longer than usual, the spinning wheel on his computer screen going round and round as rain hammered the roof of his patrol car. The results finally loaded. Again, nothing notable appeared. Lisa Chen, 34, current address in Oak Ridge for the past 2 years. Previously lived in Bridgeport. Worked as a graphic designer at a local marketing firm. No wants, no warrants, no criminal history. Still, that nagging feeling wouldn't leave him. He grabbed his hat and stepped back into the downpour. As he approached her car again, he noticed her quickly stuffing something into the glove compartment. The action was hurried, almost panicked. "Everything seems to be in order, Ms. Chen," he said, handing back her documents. "But I'm a little concerned about your driving. Would you mind stepping out of the car for a moment?" Her eyes widened slightly. "Is that really necessary? It's pouring out there." "It won't take long. Please step out of the vehicle." She hesitated. before slowly opening her door and emerging into the rain. She wasn't dressed for the weather, wearing only a light jacket over what appeared to be office clothes, a blouse and dark pants. The rain immediately began to soak through the thin material. "I'm going to perform a quick sobriety test, standard procedure when I observe erratic driving," Mike explained, though he was fairly certain she hadn't been drinking. His instincts told him something else was going on. He led her to the flat stretch of shoulder in front of her car, where his patrol car's headlights illuminated them both. "I need you to walk in a straight line, heel to toe, for 9 steps, then turn and come back the same way." Lisa nodded, her wet hair now plastered to her face. She began the walk, concentrating hard on each step. Mike watched her movements carefully, but he was also observing other things: her general demeanor, the way she held herself, and any unusual markings or behaviors. As she turned to walk back, her sleeve pulled up again, revealing more of the tattoo he'd glimpsed earlier. What he could see now made his blood run cold. It wasn't just any tattoo. It was a black raven perched on what appeared to be a clock face. Mike felt as if the ground had tilted beneath him. He recognized that image immediately. It had haunted his dreams for nearly 20 years. The Black Raven case had been his first major investigation as a rookie cop. 5 people had vanished without a trace, the only evidence left behind being a calling card with that exact image. A raven on a Yao clock showing 3:17. The case had gone cold after the 5th disappearance. The lead detective, Mike's mentor at the time, had suffered a breakdown from the stress and eventually took early retirement. Evidence had gone missing. Witnesses changed their stories. And the prime suspect, a woman whose face Mike had memorized from grainy security footage, had vanished as completely as the victims. "Is everything okay, officer?" Lisa asked, noticing his stunned expression. Mike struggled to keep his face neutral, to maintain his professional demeanor despite the shock. "That's an interesting tattoo," he said, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. "Mind if I ask what it represents?" Lisa's hand immediately went to her wrist, pulling the sleeve down. "It's nothing. Just something I got when I was younger. A stupid decision." The rain continued to pound around them, but Mike barely noticed it now. His mind was racing through possibilities. This woman was too young to be the original suspect. She would have been a teenager when the disappearances occurred. But the tattoo was too specific to be a coincidence. "Where did you get that design?" he pressed, trying to keep his tone conversational, despite the adrenaline now coursing through his body. "I don't remember exactly," she said, not meeting his eyes. "Some tattoo shop in Bridgeport. Look, am I free to go? I'm getting soaked out here." Mike needed to think. He couldn't legally detain her without cause, and a suspicious tattoo wasn't enough. But he couldn't just let her drive away, not with that raven on her wrist. "Your taillight," he said, grasping for a reason. "It's a safety violation. I should write you a ticket." He motioned for her to follow him back to his patrol car, where he could keep her in sight while figuring out his next move. As they walked, his mind flashed back to the case files he'd memorized as a young officer. The victims' faces, the evidence boards, the countless dead ends that had driven his mentor to the breaking point. Mike's hands were steady as he wrote out the citation, but his mind was anything but calm. He needed to find out who Lisa Chen really was and what connection she had to a 20-year-old cold case that had defined his early career. Whatever it took, he wasn't letting her disappear into the rainy night without answers. Not when she was wearing the mark of the black raven on her skin. Mike handed the ticket to Lisa, watching her face carefully. "This is just a warning for the taillight. Get it fixed within 5 days and bring the receipt to the station. We'll tear up the ticket." "Thank you," she said, taking the paper with fingers that still trembled slightly. The rain had lessened to a steady drizzle, but they were both soaked through. "One more thing before you go," Mike said, making a split-second decision. He pulled out his phone and opened a photo album he rarely looked at these days. He scrolled until he found what he was looking for: a picture of the original Black Raven calling card from the evidence files. He turned the screen toward Lisa. "Does this look familiar to you?" The change in her expression was immediate and unmistakable. She took a sharp breath, her eyes widening before she quickly composed herself. "I don't know what that is," she said, but her voice cracked on the last word. "I think you do," Mike said quietly. "That image matches your tattoo exactly. The raven. The clock showing 3:17. It's not the kind of thing you'd find in a standard tattoo catalog." Lisa glanced toward her car as if calculating her chances of making a run for it. Mike subtly shifted his position, blocking her path. "I'm not in trouble, am I?" she asked. "Having a tattoo isn't illegal." "No, it's not," Mike agreed. "But lying to a police officer during an investigation can be problematic." "Investigation? I thought this was about a taillight." Mike studied her for a long moment. His instincts as a cop were screaming that she was connected to the case, but he didn't want to spook her. If she drove away now, he might never get answers. "Look, I can see you're uncomfortable," he said, softening his tone. "How about this? There's a diner about a mile up the road, Joe's Place, open 24 hours. Why don't we both go get some coffee, dry off a bit, and talk? You're not under arrest or being detained. Just a conversation." Lisa hesitated, rain dripping from her hair. "Why would I do that?" "Because that tattoo connects to a case I worked early in my career. 5 people disappeared. The only clue left behind was that exact image. I think you know something about it, and I've spent 20 years wondering what happened to those people." Something changed in her expression, a flicker of what might have been relief or possibly recognition. "If I talk to you, it's just a conversation? I can leave whenever I want?" "Absolutely. No tricks. Just 2 people having coffee." After what seemed like an eternity, she nodded. "I'll meet you there." As Mike watched her walk back to her car, he wondered if he'd made a mistake. She could easily drive off in the opposite direction and disappear. But something told him she wouldn't. That maybe she needed to talk about this as much as he needed to listen. He followed her sedan closely as they drove to the diner, his mind racing with questions. The case had gone cold so long ago, yet he could still recite every detail. The first victim, a night janitor at the local hospital. The second, a librarian. Then a college student, a taxi driver, and finally a young mother. No connections between them except for those black raven cards left where each had last been seen. Joe's Place was nearly empty when they arrived. Just a couple of truck drivers at the counter and a tired-looking waitress refilling coffee cups. Mike and Lisa took a booth in the back corner, away from the windows and the few other patrons. The waitress, her name tag read Dottie, brought over 2 cups of coffee without being asked. "You two look like you fell in a lake," she commented. "Want some menus?" "Just the coffee for now, thanks," Mike said. After she walked away, he turned to Lisa. "So, the tattoo." Lisa wrapped her hands around the warm mug but didn't drink. "It's not what you think," she said softly. "What do I think?" "That I'm connected to those disappearances somehow. That I'm a bad person." Mike kept his expression neutral. "I don't know what to think yet. That's why we're talking." She took a deep breath, seeming to make a decision. Slowly, she pulled back her sleeve, revealing the entire tattoo. The black raven perched on the clock face, its wings slightly spread as if about to take flight. The time displayed was exactly 3:17. "My mother disappeared 20 years ago," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "April 17th. She was the 5th victim." Mike felt as if someone had punched him in the stomach. The 5th victim had been Tina Huang, the young mother. He remembered her face from the case files, pretty with kind eyes. She'd left behind a teenage daughter. "You're Tina Huang's daughter," he said, the pieces falling into place. "You changed your name." Lisa nodded. "After what happened, my dad and I moved away. He changed both our names. He thought whoever took Mom might come for me. Next. Why come back to Oak Ridge now? And why the tattoo?" She traced the edge of the raven with her fingertip. "I never stopped looking for answers. Dad died last year, and I found boxes of notes he'd kept about Mom's case. He'd been investigating on his own all these years. There was information in there that wasn't in the official police reports." Mike leaned forward, his coffee forgotten. "What kind of information?" Dad believed the police were looking in the wrong direction. He had theories about who might have taken Mom and the others. She paused, studying Mike's face. The tattoo was a way to connect with others who might be looking for answers too. There's a whole online community of people investigating cold cases. Someone in that community recognized this symbol. And what did they tell you? That the Black Raven wasn't just a calling card. It was a signature. Not of the person who took the victims, but of someone who was trying to find them. Mike tried to process this. It contradicted everything he thought he knew about the case. That doesn't make sense. The cards were found at each scene where someone disappeared. Yes, but what if they were left afterward? By someone tracking the disappearances? Mike's mind was racing. He remembered his old mentor, Detective Frank Weber, insisting the cards were crucial evidence. Frank had become obsessed with the case, convinced the perp was taunting them. When evidence started disappearing from the lockup, including one of the original calling cards, Internal Affairs had investigated Frank. Nothing was proven, but the cloud of suspicion never fully lifted. Frank had retired the following year. The cards were only found at the scenes because they were released to the press, Lisa continued. But the specific detail about the time, 3/17, was never made public. Only the investigators and the person leaving the cards would know that. How do you know it then? It was in Dad's notes. He found out from one of the investigators who felt sorry for our family. A memory stirred in Mike's mind. He'd been a rookie, just 2 years on the force, when he'd been assigned to assist Frank with the 5th disappearance. Frank had taken him to the scene, a parking garage where Tina Huang's car had been found, keys still in the ignition. They'd found the card tucked under the windshield wiper. Frank had picked it up before the evidence team arrived. Your mom's case was my first big investigation, Mike said. I was just a rookie, but I remember finding her car. My partner at the time, Detective Weber, was the lead investigator. Something flashed in Lisa's eyes. Weber? Frank Weber? Yes. He retired years ago. The case broke him, I think. Lisa pulled a small notebook from her purse and flipped through it frantically. Weber, she muttered. Weber. Here, she turned the notebook so Mike could see. It was a list of names with Frank's circled in red. Dad suspected someone inside the department was involved. Weber's name came up multiple times in his notes. Mike felt a chill that had nothing to do with his wet clothes. That's a serious accusation. Frank was a good cop, dedicated. Maybe too dedicated, Lisa suggested. Dad found something strange. In the weeks before each disappearance, the victims had all reported minor break-ins or vandalism. Nothing valuable taken, just things moved around, like someone had been in their homes. They filed police reports? Yes. And guess who took most of those reports? Mike didn't need to hear the answer. He already knew. Frank? Lisa nodded. He made contact with each victim before they disappeared. Dad thought he was selecting them somehow. Mike's mind was reeling. Could Frank have been involved? The man who'd mentored him, who'd shown him how to be a detective? It seemed impossible, yet something about it clicked into place. Frank's obsession with the case, his breakdown when they couldn't solve it, the missing evidence. What happened to Detective Weber after he retired? Lisa asked. He moved away. Last I heard, he was living in a cabin somewhere upstate. Became a bit of a hermit. I need to find him, Lisa said, her voice suddenly urgent. He might be the only person who knows what really happened to my mother. Mike looked at her, seeing for the first time the desperate hope behind her composed exterior. She'd carried this burden for 20 years, never giving up on finding the truth. No, he said firmly. We need to find him. But we do this by the book. I'm going to reopen the investigation, officially. You can do that? After so long? There's no statute of limitations on missing persons cases. I'll need to see your father's notes, all of them. Lisa hesitated. I've been keeping this to myself for so long, trusting no one. I understand, Mike said. But you got that tattoo for a reason. You were looking for someone who could help you find the truth. Maybe that's me. Outside, the rain had stopped. The first hint of dawn was beginning to lighten the eastern sky. Mike knew he was standing at a crossroads, one that could potentially destroy his mentor's reputation and force him to question everything he thought he knew about being a cop. But sitting across from him was a daughter who had never stopped searching for her mother. Whatever the truth was, she deserved to know it. "We'll find answers," he promised. Together. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Mike's small apartment as he spread Lisa's father's notes across his kitchen table. He hadn't gone home after their meeting at the diner. Instead, he'd driven straight to the station to pull the original Black Raven case files from storage. 20 years of dust had covered the boxes, as if the department itself had tried to bury the unsolved mystery. Now, red-eyed from lack of sleep, he compared the official reports with the meticulous notes Lisa's father had compiled. The differences were striking. "Your dad was thorough," Mike said, looking up as Lisa emerged from his bathroom, her hair still damp from the shower he'd offered her. She'd changed into dry clothes she'd had in her car, jeans, and a simple blue sweater. "He never stopped looking," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee from the pot Mike had brewed. "Even when everyone else gave up, he kept digging." Mike pointed to a timeline her father had created. He noticed something the police investigation missed. "Look at these dates. Each victim reported strange occurrences exactly 12 days before they disappeared. Hang-up phone calls, things moved in their houses, the feeling of being watched. Dad called it the stalking period," Lisa said, sitting down across from him. "He believed whoever took them studied their routines first." Mike nodded, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. "And each victim reported these incidents to the police." "To Frank Weber," Lisa added. "Except for the first victim. That report was taken by another officer." Mike picked up the original police report on the first victim, scanning it carefully. "Officer Thomas Riley took the initial report. I remember Tom. He retired about 10 years ago. Moved to Florida." He frowned, noticing something. "Wait a minute. Weber requested to be assigned to the follow-up on this case, even though it wasn't his district. So he inserted himself into the investigation from the beginning," Lisa said. "It looks that way." Mike rubbed his tired eyes. "But it still doesn't make sense. Why would Frank take these people? There's no obvious connection between the victims." Lisa pulled out another page from her father's notes. "Dad thought there was. Look at this." The page contained a diagram, with each victim's name circled and connected by lines to various places and events. At the center was a name, Robert Delaney. "Who's Robert Delaney?" Mike asked. He was a local businessman who died in a car accident about a year before the first disappearance. Dad found out that each victim had some connection to Delaney or his death. Mike studied the diagram. "The janitor. He was working at the hospital the night Delaney died." "Yes." "The librarian had helped Delaney with research for his business. The college student was dating Delaney's nephew. The taxi driver had picked Delaney up from a bar the night he died." "And your mother?" Lisa's voice grew quiet. "She was a nurse. She wasn't scheduled to work that night, but she traded shifts with someone. She was the one who pronounced him dead in the ER." Mike's mind was racing. They were all witnesses to something about Delaney's death. But what? Dad thought the car accident might not have been an accident. His notes suggest Delaney might have been murdered and the witnesses were being eliminated one by one. Mike stood up and began pacing the small kitchen. "We need to look into Delaney's death, and we need to find Frank." "How do we do that?" Lisa asked. "If he's as isolated as you say, he won't be easy to locate." Mike thought for a moment. "I know someone who might be able to help. Frank's ex-wife, Diane. They divorced right after he retired, but they stayed in touch. She still lives in town. Do you think she'll talk to you?" "Only one way to find out." 2 hours later, Mike pulled his car up to a small house on the outskirts of town. The garden was well maintained, with bright flowers blooming despite the late season. A gray-haired woman was kneeling by a flower bed wearing gardening gloves and a wide-brimmed hat. "Stay here," Mike told Lisa. "She doesn't know you and I don't want to overwhelm her." Lisa nodded, but the tension in her jaw told him she wasn't happy about it. Diane Weber looked up as Mike approached, shading her eyes with one hand. Recognition dawned on her face. "Mike Reynolds," she said, standing and removing her gloves. "It's been years. You're a detective now, I hear." "Yes, ma'am. I made detective about 5 years ago." "Frank would be proud. He always said you had good instincts." She studied his face. "But this isn't a social call, is it?" "No, ma'am, I need to talk to Frank. It's important." The smile faded from Diane's face. "What's this about, Mike?" "The Black Raven case. Some new information has come to light." Diane glanced toward Mike's car where Lisa sat watching them. "That's Tina Huang's daughter, isn't it? I'd recognize those eyes anywhere. She looks just like her mother." Mike couldn't hide his surprise. "You knew Tina?" "I knew all of them," Diane said quietly. "The victims. Frank brought their cases home with him. Their faces haunted our dinner table, our bedroom, our lives." She sighed deeply. "Come inside, both of you. There are things you need to know." Mike motioned for Lisa to join them. Inside, the house was neat and comfortable, with family photos lining the walls. Diane led them to a small study and unlocked a desk drawer, removing a thick manila envelope. "Frank gave me this before he left," she said, placing it on the desk. "He made me promise not to open it unless someone came asking about the case. Said it would explain everything." Mike and Lisa exchanged glances. "You never looked inside?" Lisa asked. "No. I wanted to respect his wishes, and truthfully, I didn't want to know. That case destroyed our marriage. I didn't want it to haunt me anymore." She pushed the envelope toward them. "But it's time. Whatever's in there, you should see it." Mike carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of photographs, official reports, and handwritten notes. On top was a letter addressed to whoever is still looking. With a deep breath, he began to read aloud. "If you're reading this, you've figured out that the Black Raven cases weren't what they seemed. I didn't take those people. I was trying to save them. It started with Robert Delaney's death. It wasn't an accident. He was murdered because he discovered something he wasn't supposed to know about certain powerful people in Oak Ridge. I was assigned to the initial investigation and ruled it an accident under pressure from my superiors. I knew it was wrong, but I had a family to protect. Then the witnesses started disappearing. I realized too late what was happening. By the time I figured it out, 2 people were already gone. I started leaving the Raven cards as a warning to the others. 317 was the time of Delaney's death, a signal that I knew the connection, but I was always one step behind. The person responsible isn't who you think. Look at the evidence again. Look at who had access to all the files, all the witnesses. Look at who benefited from Delaney's death. The answer is there. I couldn't stay in Oak Ridge. They were watching me too closely. But I've never stopped looking for the missing. I believe some of them might still be alive. I'm sorry, Mike. I should have trusted you back then. You were too green and I was too scared. If Tina Huang's daughter ever comes looking, tell her I tried to warn her mother. Tell her I'm still trying to make it right." The letter was signed, simply, Frank. Lisa's hands were trembling. "He thinks my mother might still be alive." Mike continued sorting through the contents of the envelope. "There's more here. Look, property records for an abandoned mine outside of town. Notes about strange deliveries of medical supplies, surveillance photos." He held up a picture of a man in a police uniform. "Chief Wilson." Diane gasped. "Thomas Wilson?" He was deputy chief back then. He took over as chief after the Black Raven cases went cold. According to Frank's notes, Wilson was on Delaney's payroll, Mike said, scanning the documents. Delaney found out Wilson was involved in something illegal and threatened to expose him. So Wilson arranged Delaney's accident, Lisa said, the pieces falling into place, and then had to get rid of anyone who might have suspected something. Wasn't right about the death. Mike nodded grimly. And who better to find potential witnesses than the detective assigned to the case? Frank, Diane whispered. They used him to identify the people who needed to disappear. And when Frank figured it out, he tried to warn them with the Raven cards, Lisa added. But he was too late. Mike gathered up the documents. "We need to Find Frank. And we need to look into this abandoned mine. I have an address, Diane said quietly. A P.O. box where I send him updates about our grandkids. It's 3 towns over. Will you take us there? Mike asked. Diane nodded. I've kept his secrets for 20 years. Maybe it's time for the truth to come out. As they prepared to leave, Lisa paused by one of the family photos on the wall. It showed a younger Frank Weber in his police uniform, looking proud and confident. Do you think we'll find them? She asked, her voice barely audible. The missing people, my mother. Mike placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. I don't know, but Frank seems to think it's possible, and right now, that's the best lead we've had in 20 years. Outside, dark clouds were gathering again, promising more rain. But for the first time in 2 decades, there was a ray of hope in the Black Raven case. And Mike was determined to follow it wherever it led, even if it meant uncovering corruption in his own department. The drive to Frank's supposed location took nearly 3 hours. Diane sat in the passenger seat of Mike's car, giving directions while Lisa dozed in the back, exhaustion finally catching up with her. The scenery gradually changed from suburban, sprawl to dense forest as they headed into the mountains. Frank always loved it up here, Diane said, breaking the long silence. Said it reminded him of where he grew up in Montana. All those trees, the quiet, no people watching your every move. Mike glanced at her. Did you know? About his suspicions regarding the case? Diane stared out the window. Not at first. Frank was always careful about what he brought home, but toward the end, before he left, he changed. Started drinking too much, talking in his sleep. She paused. He'd wake up screaming sometimes, calling out names, the victims' names. Why didn't he just report his suspicions? Go to Internal Affairs or the FBI? He tried. Diane's voice was bitter. A week before he retired, he took his evidence to the state police. The next day, our house was broken into. Nothing valuable was taken, but Frank's home office was ransacked, and we found a Black Raven card on our bed. Her hands trembled slightly. That's when I knew it was real. All of it. We packed up and left that night. Frank dropped me at my sister's place and said it was safer if we weren't together. And you've only had contact through the P.O. box since then? Christmas cards, birthday notes for the grandkids. Nothing substantial, nothing about the case. She pointed to a narrow dirt road ahead. Turn here. It's another few miles according to the address he gave me. The dirt road wound deeper into the forest. Mike's car bounced over ruts and potholes, jostling Lisa awake. Are we close? She asked, rubbing her eyes. Almost there, Diane answered. Though I'm not sure what we'll find. Frank was always careful about covering his tracks. The road ended at a clearing where a small cabin stood, weathered but well-maintained. Smoke curled from the chimney, suggesting someone was home. Mike parked and they sat for a moment watching the cabin for signs of movement. Let me go first, Mike said. If it is Frank, he might be spooked by seeing all of us at once. He approached the cabin cautiously, aware that a man who'd been in hiding for 20 years might not welcome visitors. The wooden steps to the porch creaked under his weight. He knocked firmly on the door. Frank Weber? It's Mike Reynolds, from Oak Ridge PD. Silence followed. Mike knocked again, louder this time. Frank, I'm here with Diane. We need to talk about the Black Raven case. The door opened a crack, revealing a sliver of a face much older than Mike remembered. Frank's once dark hair was now completely white, his face deeply lined. But his eyes were the same. Sharp, assessing, missing nothing. You shouldn't have. Come here, he said, his voice raspy from disuse. His gaze shifted past Mike to the car where Diane and Lisa waited. You brought her. Tina's girl. She found me, Mike explained. She has her father's notes. We know about Wilson, about Delaney. We found your letter. Frank was silent for a long moment. Then he opened the door wider. You'd better come in, all of you. Quickly. The inside of the cabin was sparse but clean. Bookshelves lined the walls and maps were spread across a large table. A wood stove provided warmth, and the furniture looked handmade. It was the home of a man who expected to move at a moment's notice. Diane entered last, her eyes meeting Frank's for the first time in 2 decades. Something unspoken passed between them. Regret, perhaps, or the weight of too many years apart. "You look good, Di," Frank said softly. "You look old," she replied, but there was no malice in her voice. Frank turned to Lisa, studying her face. "You have your mother's eyes." "You knew my mother?" Lisa asked. "I tried to save her." Frank gestured. "For them to sit. I was too late for the others, but I thought I had time with Tina. I left the card as a warning, told her to get out of town." He shook his head. "She didn't listen, or couldn't." "What happened to her?" Lisa's voice was steady, but her hands gripped her knees tightly. "Is she alive?" Frank moved to a locked cabinet and removed a thick folder. "I've spent 20 years tracking them, following leads, interviewing witnesses too scared to talk to the police." He spread photographs across the table. "This is from 8 years ago. Security camera in a hospital in Canada. The image was grainy, but showed a woman who resembled an older version of Lisa, working as what appeared to be a nurse's aide. And this is from 5 years ago, Denver. Another photo, this time of the same woman getting into a car. And this, just last year, Portland. A distant shot of the woman shopping at an outdoor market." Lisa's hands shook as she touched the photos. "It's her. It's really her." She looked up at Frank. "She's alive?" "I believe so, but she's not using her real name and she never stays in one place for long. It's like she's running from something, or someone." "Wilson," Mike said grimly. "If he's behind this, he must know she escaped." Frank nodded. "I think all the victims were supposed to be killed after they were taken. But something went wrong with Tina. Maybe whoever was supposed to do it couldn't go through with it. So she got away." He tapped the most recent photo. "But she's still hiding. Still afraid." "What? About the others?" Mike asked. "Any sign of them?" Frank's expression darkened. "No, just Tina. I think she was the last one taken, and something changed in their operation by then." "The mine?" Lisa said suddenly. "In your notes you mentioned an abandoned mine. Could the others be there?" "It's possible." Frank pulled out a map of the area surrounding Oak Ridge. "The old Cooper mine shut down 30 years ago, but there were reports of activity there around the time of the disappearances. Strange deliveries, lights at night. I tried to get a warrant to search it but was blocked at every turn." "By Wilson," Mike said. "By Wilson," Frank confirmed. "After the 5th disappearance, your mother," he nodded to Lisa. "I went out there on my own, found tire tracks, fresh ones. But before I could investigate further, 2 men with guns suggested I leave. They were wearing police uniforms. Our uniforms." Mike leaned over the map. "The mine is still there. Officially abandoned, but the property is owned by a company called Westridge Holdings." "A shell company," Frank said. "I traced it back as far as I could. The ownership is buried under layers of corporations, but I'm certain Wilson is connected to it somehow." "We need to go there," Lisa said firmly. "If there's any chance the others are alive or if there's evidence of what happened to them." "It's too dangerous," Frank protested. "Wilson is still chief of police. If he finds out you're looking into this, he already knows," Mike interrupted. "Or he will soon. I requested the original case files before we left. If Wilson is monitoring access to those records, he knows someone is digging into the black." Raven again. A heavy silence fell over the room. Finally, Frank spoke. "Then we don't have much time. Wilson won't let this surface again. He can't afford to." "What do we do?" Diane asked, speaking for the first time since they'd entered the cabin. Frank looked at Mike. "You're a detective now. You have resources I don't. Access to databases, official channels." Mike nodded. "I can run Westridge Holdings through our financial crimes database, see if anything flags, maybe find connections to Wilson or others involved. I have a contact at the newspaper," Lisa added. "A friend." She could help us dig into Wilson's background discreetly. Good, Frank said. But we still need to check the mine. If there's evidence there, physical evidence, it could break this whole thing open. I'll go, Mike volunteered. Not alone, Frank said. I know the layout. I've been watching the place for years. There's still activity there even now. Monthly deliveries, security patrols. What are they protecting after all this time? Diane wondered. That's what we need to find. Out. Frank stood up, a new energy in his movements. I have gear here. Cameras, radios. We can go tonight, under cover of darkness. I'm coming too, Lisa insisted. Frank began to protest, but Lisa cut him off. This is about my mother. About what happened to her. I've spent 20 years wondering, searching. I'm not sitting this out. Mike saw the determination in her eyes. The same look he'd noticed when he first pulled her over on that rainy night. The same determination that had led her to get that tattoo, to come back to Oak Ridge, to keep searching when everyone else had given up. She comes, he said to Frank. But we do this smart, in and out, evidence only. We're not confronting anyone. Frank looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. We leave at midnight. Get some rest until then. Once we start this, there's no turning back. Wilson has too much to lose. He'll do whatever it takes to keep his secrets buried. As the others prepared for the night ahead, Mike stepped outside onto the porch. The forest was quiet except for the occasional call of a bird. He took out his phone. No signal as expected this deep in the mountains. They were on their own. He thought about his career, his life in Oak Ridge. After tonight, nothing would be the same. He was about to accuse his own chief of kidnapping, possibly murder. The evidence would have to be rock solid. The cabin door opened behind him, and Lisa stepped out. Having second thoughts? She asked. Mike shook his head. Just thinking about what we might find. I've imagined 1,000 scenarios over the years, finding Mom alive, finding out she's dead, never knowing at all. Lisa's voice was calm, resigned. Whatever we discover tonight, it's better than not knowing. Mike nodded, understanding. Sometimes the truth, however painful, was the only path to peace. Inside the cabin, Frank was gathering equipment, his movements precise and practiced. After 20 years of waiting, of hunting alone, his chance for justice had finally arrived. And he wasn't going to waste it. The night air was cold and damp as they made their way through the forest. Frank led them along a barely visible path, his movements confident despite the darkness. They had left Diane at the cabin. Someone needed to know where they'd gone in case things went wrong. The main entrance will be guarded, Frank whispered as they paused to rest. But there's a ventilation shaft on the north side that's been abandoned. I found it years ago but never had the backup to investigate properly. Mike adjusted the small backpack containing their camera and other equipment. How far in does it go? Far enough to access the main tunnels. The mine isn't as abandoned as they want people to think. There's been electrical work done, reinforced walls. They've turned part of it into some kind of facility. Lisa pulled her jacket tighter against the chill. What if we find them? The missing people. Frank's expression was grim in the faint moonlight. After 20 years, I don't know. But we need evidence of what happened, one way or another. They continued through the woods until the trees thinned, revealing a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Beyond it, the dark outline of mining structures rose against the night sky. A floodlight swept across the main entrance where a small guardhouse stood. Frank pointed to their left. The ventilation shaft is about 200 yards that way. The fence has been cut and repaired before, probably by local kids. We can use the same spot. They moved along the perimeter until Frank found what he was looking for, a section of fencing that showed signs of previous damage. With wire cutters from his pack, he quickly created an opening large enough for them to squeeze through. The ventilation shaft was hidden behind a growth of bushes, a rusted metal tube emerging from the hillside, its grate long since removed. Frank went first, using a small flashlight to illuminate the way. The shaft was narrow but navigable, requiring them to crouch as they moved deeper into the earth. The air grew stale, carrying the scent of damp stone and something else. Antiseptic. Like a hospital. After what felt like an eternity of crawling through darkness, the shaft opened into a larger tunnel reinforced with modern support beams. Strip lighting ran along the ceiling, though it was currently off. "This is all new," Frank whispered, pointing to the supports. "These weren't here when the mine closed." Mike pulled out a small digital camera and began taking photos of everything: the lights, the supports, the freshly laid concrete floor. This was no abandoned mine. It was a facility, disguised as one. They moved cautiously through the tunnel until it split in two directions. Frank hesitated, then pointed right. The main shaft should be that way. If they've built something down here, that's where it would be. The tunnel gradually widened, and more electrical conduits appeared along the walls. Then they heard it. The low hum of machinery coming from up ahead. The tunnel ended at a heavy metal door with a keypad lock. "Now what?" Lisa whispered. Frank pulled something from his pocket, a small electronic device. 20 years as a cop teaches you a few things," he murmured, attaching it to the keypad. Red numbers flickered across its screen, testing combinations until there was a soft click and the door unlocked. "Stay behind me," Frank warned as he eased the door open. The room beyond was startlingly white and clinical, a stark contrast to the rough mine tunnels. It appeared to be some kind of medical facility, with clean rooms visible through glass walls. Equipment hummed softly, monitoring systems blinked, but there was no sign of people. "What is this place?" Mike wondered aloud, continuing to photograph everything. Lisa moved to one of the glass walls, peering inside. "It looks like a hospital room. But why build a hospital in an abandoned mine?" Frank was examining a computer terminal. "To keep it hidden. To do things you don't want anyone to know about." He typed something and the screen lit up. "It's still active, recently used." Mike joined him, looking over his shoulder as Frank navigated through files on the computer. "Patient records," Mike said in disbelief. "They're labeled by number, not names." Frank opened one of the files. A photo appeared, a man in his 60s, thin and frail-looking. "Thomas Reed," Frank breathed. "The janitor. The first victim." "He's alive?" Lisa asked, moving closer. "As of 6 months ago, according to this file." Frank continued scrolling. "Some kind of experimental treatment. References to Project Renewal." "Check for my mother," Lisa urged. "Tina Huang." Frank searched through the files. "No Tina Huang. But there's a Jane Doe admitted around the same time your mother disappeared." He opened the file. "Last update was 8 years ago. Patient escaped during transfer." "That matches when you first spotted her in Canada," Mike said. To Frank, a noise from the corridor outside froze them in place. Footsteps, approaching. "We need to hide," Frank hissed, quickly closing the files on the computer. They ducked behind a bank of equipment just as the door opened. 2 men in security uniforms entered, followed by a third man whose face Mike recognized immediately from police department functions, Chief Thomas Wilson. "The perimeter alarm was triggered near the north ventilation shaft," one of the guards was saying. "Could be animals, but we should check it out." Wilson nodded. "Do a full sweep. No one can know about this place, especially now." "Yes, sir." "What?" "About the transfer scheduled for tomorrow?" "Proceed as planned. The board is anxious to see results from the new protocol." Wilson moved to the computer terminal they had just been using. "Check the main lab, too. I want to make sure all the test subjects are secure." The guards left and Wilson began typing at the computer. From their hiding place, Mike could see his face illuminated by the screen's glow, the face of a man he'd respected, worked with, trusted. Now seeing him here, Mike understood the depth of the betrayal. Frank shifted beside him, his hand moving to the gun at his hip. Mike placed a restraining hand on his arm, shaking his head slightly. They needed more evidence before confronting Wilson. Suddenly a phone rang. Wilson's cell. He answered it, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "Wilson." "Yes, I'm at the facility now." He paused, listening. No, everything is proceeding according to schedule. The board will have their demonstration tomorrow. Another pause. Yes, the Huang woman is still a liability, but we have leads on her location. Portland area. It's just a matter of time. Lisa stiffened at the mention of her mother. Mike tightened, his grip on Frank's arm, willing him to stay put. 20 years is a long time, Wilson continued. But the results speak for themselves. Human trials have exceeded expectations. Longevity, tissue regeneration, it's all working. Delaney's research was the key all along. He laughed softly. Ironic that he fought so hard to keep it ethical when the applications are so much broader. As Wilson talked, Mike carefully removed the camera from his bag and began recording video of the chief. Every word was another nail in Wilson's coffin. No, there's been no connection to the original disappearances. The Black Raven case is cold, just as we planned. Weber disappeared years ago, and no one else was close to the truth. Wilson glanced at his watch. I need to finish the inspection. The board members arrive at noon tomorrow. Yes, I'll keep you updated. He ended the call and turned back to the computer, typing rapidly. After a few minutes, he closed the files and headed for a door on the far side of the room. Once it closed, behind him, Mike let out the breath he'd been holding. Did you get all that? He whispered to Frank. Frank nodded grimly. Every word. It's worse than I thought. They've been experimenting on the victims for 20 years. Delaney must have been developing some kind of medical treatment, Mike said. Wilson and these board people stole his research and have been continuing it in secret. Using kidnapped people as test subjects, Lisa added, her voice shaking with anger. But my mother got away. And they're still looking for her, Frank said. We need to warn her. Mike checked the camera to ensure the video was saved. We have what we need. Let's get out of here before those guards come back. They made their way back through the tunnel system, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. The ventilation shaft seemed even longer and narrower on the return journey, but finally they emerged into the cool night air. They were halfway to the fence when floodlights suddenly blazed to life, illuminating the area. A voice called out through a megaphone. Stop right there, police. They froze. Several officers in tactical gear emerged from the trees, weapons drawn, and at the center stood Chief Wilson. Detective Reynolds, Wilson said, his voice carrying in the night air. What a surprise. Trespassing on private property with a fugitive. He nodded toward Frank. And a civilian. His gaze lingered on Lisa. You look familiar, young lady. It's over, Wilson, Mike called back. We know everything. About Delaney. About the facility. About what you've been doing to those people for 20 years. Wilson's expression didn't change. I don't know what you're talking about. This is an abandoned, mine private property. You're all trespassing and will be arrested accordingly. We have proof, Frank said, stepping forward. Video, photos, your own words. It's all been transmitted already to secure locations. This was a bluff. They had no way to transmit anything from the mine. But Wilson's momentary hesitation suggested it had hit home. Take them into custody, Wilson ordered his men. Separate vehicles, and search them thoroughly. As the officers moved forward, a sudden commotion erupted from the trees behind Wilson. Flashlights bobbed through the darkness and voices called out. Wilson turned, distracted by the intrusion. Police, FBI, everyone freeze. More officers emerged, but these wore different tactical gear, federal agents, their weapons trained on. Wilson and his men. A woman stepped forward, badge held high. Chief Wilson, you're under arrest for kidnapping, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. Officers, lower your weapons. Wilson's men looked to him in confusion. Some lowered their guns, others kept them raised. This is a mistake, Wilson said, but his voice had lost its authority. No mistake, the FBI agent replied. We've been investigating your operation for months. Tonight we received an anonymous tip about activity at this location. She glanced toward Mike, Frank, and Lisa. Plus a very detailed email with 20 years of evidence compiled by former Detective Frank Weber. Frank smiled slightly. Diane. She must have sent my files to the FBI when we didn't return on schedule. The federal agents moved in, securing Wilson and the officers who had chosen to stand with him. Others surrendered without resistance, clearly shocked by the revelations about their chief. As the scene unfolded, Mike turned to Lisa. This still doesn't tell us where your mother is now. But we know she's alive, Lisa said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. And we know she escaped. That's more than I've had for 20 years. The FBI will help us find her, Frank promised, and with Wilson in custody, she won't need to hide anymore. As dawn broke over the mountains, they watched the federal agents leading Wilson and his accomplices away. The mine that had held so many secrets for so long was being secured as a crime scene, its hidden facility exposed at last. The Black Raven case was finally coming to an end. Justice, so long delayed, was at hand. And somewhere, perhaps not too far away, a woman who had been running for 8 years might finally be able to come home to the daughter who had never stopped looking for her.